Hello everyone, and by everyone I mean all you Outer Wilds cultists that wish you could play the game again for the first time. Welcome in. So, I recorded this a few years ago, but I'm just getting around to editing it now. Before we start though, I need to give a few disclaimers. First, if you haven't played Outer Wilds before, stop watching this. This game is too special to spoil it for yourself. Go play it first, then you can come back and watch as many Outer Wilds videos as you want. Second, now this is a big screw up on my part, but I somehow managed to break my translator tool. May have been a bad install, or maybe I messed with config files that I shouldn't have. I'm still not entirely sure. Either way, the translator didn't work. My apologies if this makes you want to yell at your screen. Since then I've gone back and played the game properly and watched countless playthroughs on YouTube, so I know the feeling of screaming internally at the streamer butchering your favorite game. Finally, in another rookie mistake, I lost all the mic audio for these recordings, just completely unusable. I did realize my F-up pretty soon after I finished the game, so to try to salvage it, I immediately watched my footage back and recorded what's essentially a commentary track of my thoughts and what was going through my head at the time I played it. Now that it's been a few years, I'm going to finally stop procrastinating and tackle the absolute mountain of editing it's going to take to cut this down into something watchable. I hope it comes out okay. With all that out of the way, let's get to it. The search for Feldspar ended with the debacle on Dark Bramble, so I needed to find a new lead to chase down. I went over to my ship log to see what else was available. The two remaining leads I had was to either find Gabbro on Giant Steep, or go check out the lunar ruins on the Outer Rock. Since I had already been to the Outer Rock, I decided that one would probably be easier than going somewhere completely unknown. I blasted off from my ship and headed towards the Outer Rock, which thankfully was cresting the sky just as I left. And then I orbited around until I saw something that looked like a Nomai ruin. I spotted something that looked like ruins near one of the poles of the moon, and I attempted to land my ship without using the landing camera, which caused me to sway about violently until I crashed into the surface. But a landing is a landing. The lunar ruins looked very old and had clearly been deteriorated over the ages. I found a glowing blue ball on the ground that moved when I looked at it. When I put the ball to the slot that represented Giant Steep, the concentric rings on the outside of the ruins started to turn about until they all lined up facing Giant Steep. Once they lined up, I heard the sound of rushing wind. In zooming in with my signal scope, I could hear Gabbro playing his flute. I moved the ball over to the symbol for Brittle Hollow, and again the rings spun around until they lined up facing Brittle Hollow. The sounds I was hearing appeared to sound like... I wasn't really quite sure, but I would later recognize that sound as the hum of a gravity crystal. When I zoomed in with my signal scope, I could hear Rybeck playing the banjo. When I moved the ball to the symbol for the sun, the rings lined up facing the sun, and I could hear the sound of the roiling surface of the sun. The last symbol was the symbol for the Big Bang, but when I moved the glowing ball over to this slot, the rings just continued to spin around wildly, not ever lining up or going to a fixed location. In the structure down below, I found a recording from Rybeck. They stated that, based on what they were able to translate from the Nomai writing, they believe this device was constructed to try to find something specific. They also mentioned that they could translate something about the south pole of Brittle Hollow, so they left the outer rock to go investigate what was on Brittle Hollow. Based on Rybeck's observations, we can infer that this device was made to locate things, and it's successfully able to locate the sun giants deep in Brittle Hollow by looking for their sound and then zeroing in on it. So, since the device was made to look for things by their sounds, it would make sense that if they were looking for something specific, that thing would be the remnant sound of the Big Bang, or the birthplace of the universe. Below I found more text, but still wasn't able to translate it. I also found a glowing blue scroll and was able to insert it into one of these walls with a triangular hole. The scroll produced text on the wall that, once again, still couldn't translate. I tried a few different things to make it work, wiggling my cursor around, carefully tracing the words as they went around in a spiral, but no matter what I did, the text still wouldn't translate. Feeling confident that I explored everything there was to explore here, I went back to the surface and headed to my ship. I checked my ship log to see if it could provide any context to what I had just seen. The only new information I got was that Rybeck headed to Brittle Hollow to investigate the South Pole. I decided to see if I could track down Rybeck on Brittle Hollow to see if they knew anything more about the device we had just discovered. I locked onto Brittle Hollow and then used the autopilot to get closer. Up close, Brittle Hollow is much more interesting. The crust of the planet seemed to be brittle and had broken in places. There was a volcanic moon spewing comets into the air, and in the horizon I saw some snow, which indicated this must be a polar ice cap. I wasn't sure which pole I was supposed to be going to, or more accurately, which one was north or south, but at this pole I found Rybeck's ship, so I decided to put my ship down next to it. I hopped out and started to investigate. Rybeck's ship looked a bit different than my ship, and I wasn't able to get inside of it. Next to Rybeck's ship was 2 lights and a staircase leading down into a cave entrance, so I descended to see what I could find. Inside was a broken door that I couldn't open, and a recording left by Rybeck. Rybeck stated that they were able to land on Brittle Hollow with a little difficulty and a few ship repairs, but they made it. They tried to get inside the dome structure on the South Pole, but weren't able to find any entrances from the surface because the door was broken. Rybeck knows there's more paths below the surface, so they decided to go down there to check it out. From this location, Rybeck headed north towards the equator. I went back to my ship to see what the ship log had to say. It just reiterated that the door on the big dome of the South Pole was broken. After getting my bearings using the compass, I headed north towards the equator and found a crater filled with trees and nomai buildings. Inside one of the buildings was the smoldering remainder of a campfire that suggested Rybeck had recently been here. I lit the fire to produce some light, and then I found some notes left by Rybeck on the wall. Rybeck stated that the journey was harrowing because of the meteors, and in comedic timing, I was jump-scared by a meteor. Rybeck also mentioned there was a nomai path that starts across from the campsite in a ruined building with trees growing out of it. After I finished reading the note, I tried looking up in the sky to see if I could see any of the meteors that had just crashed down around me. After a second, I was able to locate a meteor that was danger close and exploded on the ground mere feet from me. I took a look around the rest of the village, found a nomai skeleton and what appeared to be a broken gravity crystal on the ground. There was also the building with the trees growing out of it that Rybeck mentioned, and another building that was full of ghost matter. I pulled out my scout to take a look. At first I tried to shoot the scout out and take pictures, but that proved a little cumbersome. So I switched the scout over to photo mode to see if I could pinpoint the exact locations of the ghost matter. It appeared that the ghost matter was only coming from inside this house, so I should be safe elsewhere in this little encampment. I went over to the building with the trees growing out of it to try to find an entrance, but both of the doorways were blocked. However, up on the roof there was a hole in the ceiling which I could drop down. Inside was another nomai skeleton and some more gravity crystals. I found the stairs Rybeck mentioned and descended down, and came to a path with several gravity crystals. While contemplating what to do, the gravity crystal grabbed me automatically, so I continued to head down the path laid before me. Eventually, the gravity crystal path led to a landing where I was able to reorient myself back on normal gravity. When I got here, my suit notified me there was an identified signal nearby that must have been Rybeck. While looking for Rybeck with my signal scope, I inadvertently came across some notes left by Rybeck. They stated the journey down from the surface was deeply unpleasant, and they weren't going to think about how they eventually needed to go back up that path. To the north was the Hanging City, and to the east was a gravity cannon. Rybeck also noted that there was somewhere they could camp with oxygen down below. Above Rybeck's notes was what appeared to be a map. In the center was a universal symbol for "You are here." In the south was the big dome. Towards the west was something. The east had a gravity cannon, and to the north was the Hanging City. I was surprised when a giant chunk of Brittle Hollow seemed to fall right next to me. I saw more gravity crystals heading down, so I descended and figured this must have been where Rybeck went. While descending, I noticed a weird aberration in a hole below me. There appeared to be a giant black object that was bending light around it. I'm a bit knowledgeable in physics, so I assumed this was gravitational lensing, and what I was actually looking at was a black hole at the center of the planet. And then I came across Rybeck in their camp. They were excited that my first launch went well, and introduced me to Brittle Hollow. I asked Rybeck what they were doing out here, and they said they were here to see the Hanging City, a place where the nomai lived long before Hearthians existed. Rybeck let us know that they were terrified of space, and that this journey was not an easy thing for them to do. On the way down, they tripped on a gravity crystal and luckily managed to land somewhere their little scout was halfway stable. Apparently, the little scout can be used to probe the surface integrity of various parts of Brittle Hollow to see if it's stable or not. I asked Ryback where I should explore here. They suggested to not explore the back hole, which is unfortunate because the most exciting stuff on Brittle Hollow is all below the surface. Ryback informed us that the big dome on the South Pole was called the Southern Observatory, and there's probably a path to enter it from below the surface. I asked Ryback what they're doing out here, and they informed us that they're an archaeologist, or more accurately, the only archaeologist on Timberhearth. They came to learn more about the Nomai because Brittle Hollow is rich with architecture and history. As I was talking to Ryback, more pieces of Brittle Hollow seemed to be falling apart and into the black hole where I can't remember the name, they're called a quasar, is shot out. Basically those big blue beams of light. I decided to take a look around near Ryback's camp to see if I could get my bearings on where various things were. Over in one direction, I saw what looked like the depiction of the gravity cannon, but couldn't figure out how to get there. On the other side, I found a control interface, and moving the blue ball up created Nomai elevators, people movers. Not sure what to call them when they're horizontal. I think I'll just stick with elevators. The first elevator took me over to a platform, so I continued on and hopped in the second elevator. But this one was a lie and just deposited me in the middle of nowhere and sent me plunging into the black hole. When I was finally sucked in, I got spit out facing a chunk of Brittle Hollow and also a weird silhouetted object in front of the sun. When I turned around, it appeared that I had come out of a white hole. I locked onto the silhouetted object to further investigate what could possibly be all the way out here, and discovered what appeared to be some sort of Nomai space station. When I got closer to the space station, this glowing tiled floor sucked me in. It appears this type of glowing floor works similarly to the gravity crystals. Just off the gravity crystal path, I found a spherical structure that had an interface on it. And when I moved the interface, it rotated around to create an airlock, which allowed me to enter the inside of the station. I landed on the ground, and below me was a black pad in Ember Twin projection stone, which I picked up. And I tried placing the projection stone on the center of the pad, but nothing happened. There were also a few elevators. I went on the wrong one at first, but then went on the down elevator, and down below I found another glowing ball. I moved the glowing ball around for a bit, trying to figure out what to do, and then I eventually figured these pockets might have something to do with it. When I inserted the ball in the pockets, the station lights came on and it started to rotate. I played around with the ball for a little longer, and accidentally stepped into an elevator. When I got to the top of the elevator, I was suddenly warped somewhere else, and when I got out, it appeared I was back on Brittle Hollow. The location I was teleported to was one of the white pads in the middle of the Nomai S structure that I had previously seen on Timberhearth, and from this point on I started referring to these spots as teleporter pads. I found some jetpack fuel, and a note from Feldspar indicating that they left the spare jetpack fuel here in case anyone needed it. Inside the Nomai structure, there were some more skeletons. And up the stairs was a mural on the wall that appeared to depict a Nomai traveling between a black and white hole, just like I had just done. Down below there was a wall where I could insert the projection stone, and once again it made some text, this time blue, which was different than the other walls I had seen. But before I could check things out too much, the sun went supernova, so I, in a panic, left the building, went up to this tall vantage point, and waited for my inevitable death. All in all, that was a fairly productive loop. I managed to make my way to Brittle Hollow, find Ryback, and start chasing down some leads on how to get in the Southern Observatory. When I got my ship, I checked the ship log, and it notified me that there is a Nomai city called the Hanging City just north of Ryback's camp. And that Ryback's camp is set up at something called the Crossroads. It also reminded me that there's probably a path into the Southern Observatory from below the surface, so I decided to blast off towards Brittle Hollow to see if I could find it. When I got close to Brittle Hollow, I couldn't exactly remember where the entrance to Ryback's camp was, but rather than go off trying to find it, I got distracted by what appeared to be a Nomai spaceship crashed on the surface of Brittle Hollow. I landed the ship to go investigate. When I got out, I got prompted to identify an unidentified signal, and this one sounded different than the ones I'd heard previously. When I got closer to the source of the signal, it was identified as Escape Pod 1 on the distress beacon frequency. Apparently, this Nomai spaceship was actually an escape pod, which means the Nomai must have had some kind of trouble when they landed here. I ventured into the escape pod and saw what appeared to be rows and rows of stasis pods, which makes sense for an escape pod. You want to have a way to keep your occupants safe while you're fleeing whatever danger you just came from. I found a pillar with circles of blue Nomai text, but wasn't able to translate any of them. On a door, I found another glowing ball, which, when activated, blew the door right off the escape pod. As I tried to watch the door, I fell and landed on a platform, which crumbled beneath my feet. It appeared these platforms weren't stable, so I attempted to jump on them very gingerly, but they kept breaking. I was a bit freaked out by this point, wary of falling into the black hole below, so I took out my scout to try to probe the surface integrity like Ryback had mentioned. The scout indicated the surface integrity was 100%, but that was a lie, and it quickly deteriorated to 0 once I landed on the platform. More lies? No, this one appears to be okay. The platforms led me deeper into a cave, where my scout said the surface integrity of this chunk was okay. So I felt a little more at ease, and came to the site of what appeared to be a Nomai village. Off to the left was a path of glowing gravity crystals on the ceiling? Roof? Inside of the planet? I don't really know. And then inside the village, there was a house that contained the symbol for the Big Bang. When I looked down, I was prompted to launch my scout. Once I got in the scout into a good position, I took some pictures and discovered some murals on the wall. I decided it would probably be best to climb down there and get a closer look for myself, so I walked around the village till I could find a path down into the place my scout had showed me. Once I got down there, I discovered 3 murals. The first appeared to depict a large Nomai spaceship and the symbol for the Big Bang center of the universe. On the large spaceship were the smaller escape pods. My ship log informed me that this was a mural of a Nomai vessel encountering a signal from the Big Bang. The next mural depicted Dark Bramble ensnaring the Nomai vessel. And the final mural depicted 3 escape pods evacuating the Nomai vessel. One escape pod went to Brittle Hollow, the other escape pod went to the Hourglass Twins, and the last escape pod got stuck inside of Dark Bramble. Based on these murals, it appears that the Nomai encountered a signal, which to the Nomai a signal is a sound, from the Big Bang, likely a echo or a reverberation from the creation of the universe. So they came to our solar system to try to find the birthplace of the universe. When they got here, they got ensnared in Dark Bramble and had to launch their escape pods, which flung off across the solar system, landing in different places. And after they reestablished themselves, they continued looking for the birthplace of the universe. I explored the village for a little longer, but didn't find anything interesting, so I headed towards the trail of gravity crystals. I was very wary that the ground may crumble below me, so I sent out my scout to probe the integrity of the surface. Unfortunately, my caution turned to folly when a low surface integrity warning stopped me in my tracks, just as the piece finally crumbled and sent me and the chunk of Brittle Hollow hurtling into the black hole. I attempted to escape, but that attempt was futile, and I ended up getting sucked into the black hole again. I wasn't terribly mad at this turn of events because I did want to come back here to try to understand exactly how I teleported, because the first time I felt like I did something accidentally and didn't really understand what happened. I landed on the gravity crystal path again and went inside the airlock. This time I wanted to take my time and figure out exactly what was going on in here. Looking at the black pad, I noticed what appeared to be a very tiny black hole sucking motes of light into it. Going down the elevator, I grabbed the ball again to activate the station and make it rotate, since that seemed to do something last time. But when I landed on the pad, this time I wasn't teleported. I looked around trying to figure out what exactly was going on and noticed this image on the wall was rotating, and there appeared to be a dash of triangles pointing upwards to a depiction of Brittle Hollow. Since that picture, whatever it is, wasn't rotating before, it felt like that this had something to do with the teleportation. I grabbed the Ember Twin projection stone again and paced around while I tried to figure out how exactly I could get this to work. As I was walking around, I accidentally got teleported again and was back on Brittle Hollow. I left the pad, but wanted to get a closer look at what the white pad looked like. And when I stepped back onto the white pad, I was teleported back to the space station. Thoroughly confused at this point, I did have one idea. My thought was that maybe what happened is when the rotating picture aligned with the picture of Brittle Hollow, if I was standing on this pad, I would get teleported. So I shot my scout on it to test the theory and see what would happen. When the arrows were all lined up, the pad generated a black hole and the scout was sucked through. And through the pictures, it looked like it came out the other side on the white pad on Brittle Hollow. So I figured that that's probably how the teleportation works. So again, I stood on the pad and waited for the image to line up. And sure enough, once it did, I was transported back to Brittle Hollow. Kind of trippy, kind of cool. I imagine if it were real life, a bit nauseating. Looking at the white pad, I noticed that there appeared to be a tiny white hole in the center that was expelling motes of light from it. From this, I could infer that the Nomai somehow managed to harness the power of black and white holes to create teleportation technology. Something goes in a black hole, it comes out a white hole. Then I took a look at the mural on the wall again, which seems to confirm my theory that yes, Nomai use black and white holes to be able to teleport themselves around the solar system. I moved further into the Nomai structure to see if I could place the projection stone into the projection indentation. When I inserted the stone, I received a vision of a rocky desert planet very close to the sun. There were cacti on the ground, and a strange glowing tower was nearby. This looked pretty cool, but wasn't very informative. Based on the proximity to the sun and the name of the projection stone, I inferred that what I was doing was seeing a vision of Ember Twin. I brought up my map to check it out, and when I zoomed in on the Hourglass Twin, Ember Twin did appear to look like what was seen in the image. I could just barely make out the glowing tower on the surface of Ember Twin as well. After this, I left to continue exploring Brittle Hollow, but ran into some difficulties. I took a few loops and explored around, but I kept falling into the black hole at the center of Brittle Hollow. It was getting frustrating until eventually, on this run, I once again fell in, but this time I kept holding forward on my jetpack, and instead of falling into the black hole, I used the gravitational pull to slingshot around it and create an orbit. While trying to get back to the surface, I noticed a Nomai elevator that was dangling perilously close to the black hole, which seemed like it might be some sort of emergency escape. So I continued to orbit around, trying to adjust my orbit over towards the elevator, and eventually I was able to crash into it. The elevator caught me and brought me up to a platform where I could hear banjo music. It had spit me out right next to Rybek's camp, so I went over to say hello. I also found some spare jetpack fuel in Rybek's camp. When I talked to Rybek, we skipped the pleasantries, and I tried to tell them that I learned something, but we didn't have anything new to say. And then at this point, unfortunately, in real life, my dog took a crap on the floor, so I had to drop my controller and run away to go take care of that. When I got back, I decided to roast a marshmallow while I tried to remember what the hell I was just doing. But before I could get too far, I was interrupted by the sound of the sun going supernova. I went over by the ledge to see if I could get a better look at what was going on. But as I tried to look at it, I fell off the edge and plunged into the black hole. My terror of falling in the black hole was quickly replaced by awe as I admired the expanding supernova that was about to engulf me. Once I respawned, I was back on my mission to try to get to the Southern Observatory. I headed back to Rybek's camp to see if I could pick up the trail to get back to the South Pole. I took a look at the map to try to get my bearings. Rybek's notes reminded me the names of the various places on the map, and the arrows seemed to suggest that we could get to the Southern Observatory either from the gravity cannon to the east or the unknown object to the west. I took a look around to see if I could find either of those objects, and was able to spot what looked like the gravity cannon. So I headed down a path nearby to try to get over there. I activated a Nomai elevator which took me up, and then led me to a series of platforms. The bridges between the platforms had long since crumbled, so I had to parkour my way across these stones. Eventually, I arrived at the gravity cannon, which looked super awesome if I'm being honest. Down below, I noticed a platform which looked like it had some sort of interface device. The ship log informed me that the gravity cannon was a huge cylindrical structure that generates a strong upward gravity field. And I also recalled a Nomai shuttle from something called the Quantum Moon, whatever that is. Yeah, I would say that's a pretty strong upward gravity field. I recalled the ship again, and decided to go take a closer look. When I got to the spaceship, there was an elevator that allowed me to access the inside. On the inside of the ship was some type of Nomai tablet that I still couldn't translate. On the roof of the ship was a mini black hole, which is what the Nomai must have used to teleport their ships back and forth, like I had just done. And then towards the front of the ship was a viewport and an interface device. When I moved the glowing ball to the far left, the ship blasted off into space at a very high rate of speed. Brittle Hollow was getting smaller and smaller quickly, and I was a little concerned that I had done something bad, until I moved the glowing ball into the center column and was teleported back to Brittle Hollow. As fun as playing with Nomai spaceships sounded, I felt like I was getting a little distracted from my goal, so I hopped out and decided to hop back and see if I could find the path to the Southern Observatory from here. Directly past the Nomai ship was another interface that activated an elevator. Getting in the elevator, I could finally see the South Pole. My goal was in sight. Unfortunately, I was so distracted by looking around and trying to get my bearings, I didn't realize the elevator was leading me to nowhere and would spit me out plunging down into the black hole. In a panic, I tried to make my way to the elevator by Ryback's camp, and luckily was able to get there with relative ease. I trekked my way all the way back to the path to the Southern Observatory, and this time I was going to be a little more careful. Once I got towards the end of the elevator, I realized I had to blast off with my jetpack and land in one of the elevators going perpendicular so I could get to the next platform. I hopped over to the next platform in the series and found another Nomai elevator. This time I had to use my jetpack to boost up to get sucked into the final conveyor. Across the chasm, I noticed a row of gravity crystals, so I hopped over and followed them. The gravity crystals seemed to lead to a dead end, except there were more on the other side, so I jetpacked over, hoping gravity was correct and I would be safe, and I was. I realized I was getting pretty low on oxygen, but thankfully once I got back to solid ground, a tree was there to refill me. Then I continued to climb upwards with my jetpack. Looking up, I could see a final Nomai elevator that would hopefully lead inside the Southern Observatory. I jetpacked over towards the Nomai structure, and once I got to the top, I prepared to jetpack up, only to realize I was out of fuel. The oxygen that was being used as propellant wasn't strong enough to get me up there. I was a bit demoralized. So close, yet so far away. So I decided it was time to head back to Ryback's camp to refuel. I jumped down towards the black hole, threaded the needle between two icicles, but I missed the elevator, and nearly smacked my head about 5 different times flying through the bottom portions of the hanging city. On the next rotation, I did manage to successfully hit Ryback's elevator. So I went up, popped over at Ryback's camp, refueled my jetpack, and was back on my way for another try. Okay, third time's the charm, hopefully. I navigated the elevators and worked my way back up towards the Nomai structure. This time, with a relatively full jetpack, it was very easy to boost my way up into the elevator. And when it spit me out, lo and behold, I was finally inside the Southern Observatory. There was a lot going on here, so I just worked on things from closest to furthest. The first thing I found was a door control, which led to the outside where the broken door and Ryback's ship were before. Next up, I found another projection stone on the ground, this time labeled Giant's Deep. Placing the projection stone in the wall slot, again, made more text that I couldn't translate, but the projection indentation proved a little more fruitful. When I looked around, I saw a Nomai structure in space, which quickly fell through the clouds and then splashed down into the water. This was, a bit confusing, but I figured, hey, this must be Giant's Deep. I don't know, seems kind of interesting. Guess we'll get over there eventually. The next thing I found was a pool of what appeared to be a golden liquid on the ground, but nothing happened when I jumped in it. Then I saw 2 tornadoes. I remembered a instruction manual I'd seen on the ship that showed the scout being launched towards the tornadoes, so I pulled out my little scout and shot it into the tornado. The tornado sucked the scout straight up into the ceiling. And it did the same thing to me when I jumped in. When I tried the other tornado, the scout was instead shot straight down to the ground, and did the same thing with me. While playing around with the tornadoes, I noticed that they seemed to be spinning in opposite directions, so we had a bit of a, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey situation going on here. One type of tornado sends you up, the other type of tornado sends you down. Well, that was fun. But we've got more to explore. I went up the staircase to get to the upper level of the observatory. What I found was a series of pillars with glowing balls. The first one was marked with the symbol for Ember Twin. When I raised the ball, a projection rose up from the pool of golden liquid. It appeared to show the hourglass twins orbiting around the sun. The next in line was Timberhearth, and when that one was raised, a little model of Timberhearth came up. The same thing would happen for the next ones, which were Brittle Hollow, Giant's Deep, and Dark Bramble. This appeared to be a model of the solar system. Similar to the other location device found on the Attlerock, this was a locator device, but instead of using sound to locate things, it was using the orbit of the planets. The last symbol was of the Big Bang, and when I activated this, the solar system shrunk way down and a new orbit appeared, spinning around wildly. I tried to zoom in to get a better look, but it proved difficult. Eventually, I was able to figure out that that symbol was the symbol for the Big Bang. I was able to infer that this was another device made to try to locate the center of the universe, except instead of by sound, it was by orbit. And what I could tell from this is that the birthplace of the universe is somewhere near our solar system, but it's really, really far out. There was a couple more text walls that I ignored because why bother at this point? I figured if I was going to learn how to translate text, it would be obvious and I must find it somewhere else. So I continued on. It felt good that I accomplished my goal by getting inside the Southern Observatory and seeing all there was to see, but that victory seemed a little hollow. Leaving the observatory, I felt like I had more questions than I did answers.